out in a highly criminalized environment, as opposed to say, let's say you have legal regulation. There could be labeling, there could be like advisories on how you are or are not allowed to market, kind of like how we don't see ads for like cigarettes, right, on the TV, because there's regulation. So there's a lot of like substances like cigarettes and nicotine where the use has been going down universally, globally, even though it's not prohibited. And it's because of other factors. There are like social, economic, political, and other factors that are determining whether people use, not because something is criminalized or not. Yeah. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay, actually I think it segues to like the following question, which you can go to first. So you mentioned like healthcare and like, safety and all that. So since if the death penalty and other forms of punishment don't work, then what do these alternatives look like? So what can safety, healthcare, accountability, rehabilitation, and repair look like? And how can we reimagine, transform, and create something new together?
Right. Okay. So I think I touched on about like the reasons that people use, and also like not just use, but the reasons that people use in a way that is like harmful to them or others is often connected to all these other like kinds of resources people don't have, right? So providing access to like housing, financial assistance. I mean, we have like billions of dollars in the healthcare fund that we're not distributing to families in need, right? So if people could access the things that they need, then there's like more then they don't need to, I think, develop unhealthy relationships with drugs as much. And if they do, then they're well supported in coping with that, right? And healing or recovery. And different people have different needs. Like for some people, it's just like abstinence that works as a form of like taking care of their well-being. For some people, it's like harm reduction. So using in a way that minimizes the risks of using to themselves and others. It's like doing it in moderation. For some people, it's like kind of opioid replacement therapy. So there's so many options for people once we're willing to see it through a healthcare lens. So I think there's and again, like people who are pushed into the drug trade, if they had opportunities for like dignified work and again like access to resources overall or like equal society. So like that is the work of like abolition or transformative justice, right? It's like we want to like I think it's about like replacing two kinds of like a slippery slope with an escalator. Like if that makes sense. So the slippery slope is like someone is already like put in a situation of desperation by the kind of conditions they're born into. And then they act out of that desperation, right? Either by like participating in the drug trade, like kind of using drugs in a way that is like very risky to them, to others, and then they're punished for that. So we force people into desperation. Then when they act out of that desperation, we punish them. Right? So that's the slippery slope. And then, like when someone goes to a prison, it's not just their life that gets impacted. The family loses breadwinner. They find it harder to survive outside of prison, and there's really like the strong ripple effect that has a lot of negative externalities to society more broadly if we care about keeping society safe. If we care about public safety, there's evidence that shows that decarceration improves public safety. Right? Like if there's less people in prison, society is safer, as opposed to what we've been told all along. And like decriminalization of drugs leads to more people going into voluntary treatment. It does not lead to a rise in use because people are not using because it's criminalized, like in general, right? Or because of other reasons. And like there's a lot of evidence that shows that decriminalization and decarceration have a lot of positive externalities. Because if you imagine the same person that's maybe that 14-year-old like teenager that we then in Singapore incarcerated again and again and again and eventually sent to the gallows. Like imagine like an alternate reality where this child was supported with like care and resources. That like at school there were ways to like detect if a child is using and then support them with the appropriate care. If there was a harm reduction clinic they could go to, their family could be educated on how to support them better, and they learn to have a functional relationship with drugs or abstain, then like that's the world we want, right? Not the world where this kid is killed 30 years later, like in an execution chamber. So yeah, that's what I think the alternative looks like.
Thank you. As part of the alternative, earlier you also mentioned how abstinence does work for some people, right?
Yeah.
As like there are people in media who have been through DRC and say that it has helped them and they're living a better life. So then why do we take such a strong stance against this drug response system? Shouldn't we also acknowledge the good parts of it?
Okay. So, like, I think for every like one person, like who says that like the system has like that they've like reformed and like abstained now and that they've got their life on track, there's like hundreds of others who don't manage to, right? And abstinence, again, we're not anti-abstinence. I think it's really important to say we're not anti people abstaining totally or people choosing abstinence as a form of like responding to their drug dependence or drug use that if that's a goal for them, right? So like some of us might decide if we are diabetic to completely stop like consuming sugar. I think that, like, for example, a lot of people might change their mind about the death penalty if they know that the person isn't given a lawyer like, at the point of investigation and interrogation. The statements are taken without a lawyer and then used in court against them. We also have like multiple presumptions in the like Misuse of Drugs Act. 3 in total? More than 3, God. Okay, multiple presumptions that reverse the burden of proof, right, and make it sort of like the accused person's responsibility to show that they were not trafficking, or that they did not know what the drug was, or that they were not actually in legal possession of the drug. So, for example, like if I found a stash of chocolate in your fridge, and I was like, prove to me that this was all just for your consumption and not for you to distribute to your friends. Like, how would you go about doing that? So it's very difficult to prove these things, and that's exactly what the burden is on this person, right? So that's very unfair. And a lot of like legal like experts and law professors have pointed to the injustice of presumptions. Yeah. So and then there's also like a denial of lawyers after the criminal appeal, which means that in an instance of like is it denial of pro bono lawyers? Okay. So like if you then like have experienced a miscarriage of justice, and you don't have thousands of dollars, right? You actually don't have a way for like to access a lawyer to help you like bring that miscarriage of justice before the court. Yeah. Okay. Then a lot of other things. So many things. Yeah. There's also like a lack of independent research and reviews into cases to see if there were wrongful convictions or execution. Like in a lot of societies, there are like innocence projects and projects where people have a lot of like academic expertise, research, like resources, funding to like be a watchdog of the criminal punishment system. And we don't have that here, so we actually don't know enough about like procedural injustices and issues. Yeah, and there's also like a lack of procedural accommodations for people with disabilities, for people with like different language needs or literacy needs. I mean, lots of people accused of capital charges and sentenced to death have raised the issue that like they didn't understand what the officer was saying to them, or that they were coerced into giving a certain statement, but because there's no lawyer present, there's no recording of it, and they can't prove that, and the court chooses often to believe police officers and I didn't do that, as opposed to the accused person who's like, no, they forced me, right? So there's also like all of those imbalances, right? And who is believed and who is seen as a credible witness. Yeah. And then also, of course, we have like the threats to lawyers, whether it's in the form of like personal cost orders, fines. I mean, the two lawyers who like called themselves anti-death penalty lawyers in Singapore have both been charged with contempt of court in different counts. I think that tells us something already, right? So one is like Ravi, which a lot of people, but the other is Eugene Graysinger. Like for speaking up about like the issues they saw in their client's case, right? They were like, charged with contempt of court. So there are many forms of intimidation that lawyers face, and yeah, and then there's also like I think we can see, right, whether it's from the same trial or like Parthian's case, or the fact that like the court just found that the AGC and prisons had acted unlawfully in forwarding federal prisoners' letters without their consent to the AGC. We can see, I think, in all of this and question for ourselves what we think of this, the due process in the system, and whose interest it's in, and is it really is the like whatever race like Annamalai like really like in the public interest to prosecute and spend like a month of trial resources on when like they say that death row prisoners for whom the stakes are so high, bringing a case before the court that would take them sometimes like a few hours to deliberate on, is that's an abuse of process. So like what gets framed in abuse, what gets like who are the courts for? If it's not for the most marginalized people trying to find a voice, and that's an abuse, then who can use? Is my question. Okay. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, Koki. Okay, so we'll open questions to the floor.
It's not actually available now. I don't think so. So they were emailed to mine when she asked for it, but I think it's still available.
The question's asked. Yeah, the
Are you asking the question? The questionnaire.
asked. Yeah, but it's not published.
Yeah, it's not published. They will like so there's cherry picking. I won't say cherry picking, but maybe it's cherry of findings, and then as part of that, then they'll tell you the question that finding is in response to, but it's not like a comprehensive list of questions. The other thing we don't have access to, or people are not given, even when like academics have asked, is access to the raw data so that they can run analyses findings. And then of course the issues with the methodology is not captured. And there's also quite fundamental errors in some of the framings of the question. Methodological issues beyond the demeanor of the interviewer. Like for example, like they listed some statements and asked people whether it's true or false, and their true answer is actually like false. Right? So for example, one of the statements is like, oh, someone can escape the death penalty, like I'm paraphrasing, right? If they're just a courier and they cooperate with the authorities. And then the correct answer is true, right? But it's actually not true because like there was a case in court that clarified that it's not sufficient to cooperate with the authorities. Like when providing information that the CNB is designed to give you a certificate that information you provided led to a disruption of drug trafficking activities that couldn't have been disrupted without that piece of information from you. Right? So it's like very complicated. So again, like there are multiple statements in it that are actually false, that the correct answer is true. Yeah. Yeah, Calvin. The full list of questions. Oh, presidential clemency. I think it's last in 1998. Right? And I was from murder. I think what at least our observation is that clemencies have largely been given in murder cases rather than drug trafficking cases, and where the person is either like a woman or younger, or there's some other kinds of like circumstances around it. Yeah, I think there was, the prisoners had asked many times, like, what like, you have clemency, then you never use something else. Like, what will it take, right? And I think maybe there is a correlation between the fact that most of the people facing executions are there for drugs. And so then, like, there seems to be not room for clemency in that case, and there's also no clarity on, like what is this as an instrument, like what value does it have when it's never used? Regardless of the circumstances, like it couldn't be used for someone like nagging, cannot be used for like women like convicted of drug trafficking, sentenced to death. It's just like there's no response, there's no like understanding of what would be. And so I think we just think of it as an impotent process and system, and they can only like advise on clemency. The president can only give clemency on advice of not just the cabinet, but the agency also.
So I think actually presidential clemency is a bit of a misnomer in a sense, right? Because you look at the constitution, the president does not have the discretion to exercise clemency powers. So first, the AG must advise the cabinet, and the cabinet must advise the president. When you say advise, you direct the president whether to issue the clemency or not. And that there's a fundamental problem there, right? So this is the same as in general, that that makes a prosecution decision as to whether these people should face capital charges and on death row face execution. So in what universe will the AG go, okay, I'm going to prosecute this fella, and then
spent 4 years
with trial, appeal, then after that, okay, my advice to cabinet is to give them clemency. So I think that's one fundamental issue with the clemency process. And of course, you know, we talk about the cabinet's advice to the president, then we can look at actually whose vested interests, you know, whose personal interests in the country is that when they make these decisions, right? So I think there's been quite a few, like I think research earlier on that highlights that I think in other jurisdictions in other countries, like tenancy decisions are also driven by like how sympathetic that person's case is. Like if it's a woman, I mean in Singapore too. I think there's one drug trafficking case where the person's a woman and she was given tenancy, right? Or the fact that the person has cooperated with the authorities, right? So then when they introduced the 2012 amendment to the Misuse of Drug Act, this like certificate of assistance system, then this whole decision-making process is now moved upstream, right? So the agency sent by charge, extra certificate. So then actually it strips presidential tenancy of any kind of meaningful use. Right? And that's a big problem, right? Because like you might talk about like finality of constitution and whatnot, but I think like tenancy plays a role in the system, not just in death penalty cases, right? In all sorts of cases, when someone has a shield disability, like treated that opposite. You know, so then basically that whole aspect of independent decision making outside of the attorney general and the executive that decides that prosecute or sets up the legal system and needs to be there.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, there are people whose role it is to make the laws, and then there's the people whose role it is to execute those laws, and then there's supposed to be this third space, right, of like just looking at things from a humanitarian perspective or compassion perspective. That's supposed to create some breathing room from this otherwise very unforgiving like mechanisms and process, and that's what's stripped away when it's the people making the laws and the people executing laws who decide whether there's the humanity and the compassion, right? And so yeah, there's no more third space.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
I think the question that is kind of sometimes difficult to overcome, and even for myself, is like the not feeling powerless kind of against the system. And I would like to say kind of awakening ourselves and each other to our own power. And I think when talking to other people, like eventually it comes up to a point where it's like, well, I mean, like, what can we really change anything? You know, we take one step forward and push back like 4 times as hard and stuff like that. So, yeah, what are some things that I guess maybe we can think of or say to I don't know, like imagine these better futures.
Do you mean specifically like the moratorium on the death penalty, or in general for people to carry? Yeah.
I think with the death penalty
Okay.
in particular.
Yeah. Okay.
Like overcoming cynicism.
Yeah. I mean, I think people might also should share what their thoughts are on it if you have anything to say. But for me, what I find very compelling is that and when we say like things like not advising, like it's not just rhetorical. Right? I think it has a lot of meaning, value, because the government kills in our name in so many like explicit ways that they make explicit. Like they keep relying on this public support narrative. Like this is what Singaporeans want, this is what protects Singaporeans, we're doing it for them, and I mean that's just like obviously bullshit, right? But then when that is the narrative, then even more so, it is easy to expose that narrative. In fact, then enough of us say, oh, not in my way. Right? If there was something where they were like, oh, this is just on principle. Like, it's like ideology. Even if the people don't support, we're going to like lead the policy making courageously in this regard. Which they say about other policies. They don't say that about the death penalties. The death penalty, they need your consent. That's the way they've set it up. So when we withdraw consent and we're loud about the fact that we're not consenting, I mean, it really undermines their credibility to continue the practice because their justification is built on the consent. And so we have not just a right, but I think a very like loaded almost responsibility to oppose it vocally because it is literally in our.
question in terms of the history of composition of maybe who shared same interests, and just
Yeah, I think it's interesting because that's one of the things the next panel will look at. Like there's a kind of panel looking at the history of anti-death penalty activism, but maybe just as a quick response, there used to be actually when the movement, the abolitionist cause in Singapore was first like publicly discussed. It was a lot of politicians. So like David Marshall was one of the first to speak up about it. GP Ratnam, Chi Sun Juan, Dr. Chi have all like famously opposed the death penalty, and that used to actually be the main realm. It was really politicians and anti-death penalty lawyers who were leading the movement at that point. I mean, I guess it wasn't. Maybe it's not like accurate to call it a movement, but at least like making interventions, opposing locally. Yeah, and that's shifted. And I think now it's quite difficult to find any party or politician, except Paul. Where's Paul? Yeah. So who will come out and say that they're against the death penalty? And even when a specific politician does, like again, I only know Paul. I don't know anyone else who will say it publicly. They will say, "I'm not speaking for my party." Right? It's just like my view. So I think that it has shifted in terms of like the comfort that opposition parties, politicians feel in taking a stand on the death penalty, which is, I think, a loss.
We can take one. Any more?
Louisa?
Okay, I'll try. I think this has been poorly thought out, but I'd be curious about if we acknowledge that, okay, let's say the death penalty doesn't work, criminalization of drug trafficking does not work, criminalization of drugs does not work, and we get somebody to agree with that. I think a concern that I often hear is that how do we make sure that, big companies, big pharma doesn't go and like try to capitalize on it and fuck us over the same way that the OxyContin situation, the fentanyl situation in some other countries has happened. Like, how can we make sure that if we decriminalize, that this doesn't just become another way of exploiting people for financial gain and causing harm in maybe a more significant way?
I mean, I would say two things. One is there is already big business in drugs. It's multi-billion dollar, I think it's trillion-dollar industry. So we're not getting away from it through prohibition, right? And like I said, other things you could do if it was a legally regulated market, like have practices of ethics and corporate accountability and checks and regulation practice. You can't have any of that. So most people who in a criminalized market get a substance don't know what's in it. That's what makes them very unsafe and much more vulnerable. If I can read on a packet like I can when I go to the pharmacy, like what are the ingredients, then I'm safer, right? So there is already a massive amount of exploitation, financial gain, harm, and imbalance that I think through legal regulation, at least can be addressed. Because then workers can have rights, unionize, and consumers can have rights and make demands, and there are other ways of doing that. And I mean that's like one response. But also I think there's so much to learn from corporate takeover of some of these markets you mentioned, and of what we've learned from tobacco industries, what we've learned from alcohol industries, from the fight against these big business and corporate interests that have led to a lot of harm. And a lot of there's an immense amount of work in the drug policy reform space to prevent corporate capture when there is opening, there's a liberalization of the market. And there are actually really exciting economic models that are actually super socialist, right? Where there's first right, but once there's a legal market that's not for small producers and growers who have been historically harmed by the drugs. And so the growers like cannabis or whatever who have been historically harmed and criminalized, their communities get the first right of participating in the market, and that there are rules and regulations that actually prevent big business from coming into the market, the legal market, and allowing like small growers, small producers, small like, traders to actually like do it in a way that is responsible to their communities. There are also models like instead of like social clubs where you can only access it if you're a member of the club and you're part of the community. So there are like non-profit models of drug regulation where you cannot like make profit off of the sale of drugs, which is still means it's legally regulated, but it's non-profit. Yeah. So there's many different models, super exciting, not long enough, not around for long enough, and not enough models have been tried to be like, conclusively like this is the gold standard of best practice. But I think once you move away from like criminalization, then you can start to imagine and experiment, and we can determine what it would look like. It's not inevitable copy capture, and there are many examples that are heartening to show that it's not inevitable.
Team has worked really hard to put this together. The contents of this guide were compiled from a variety of sources and was also heavily involved by our outreach team who have been going door knocking to talk to Singaporeans about capital punishment. So some folks will actually be talking more about this door knocking later, which we will resume in November. So if you want to join, or like rather like please join us in going for door knocking. So you can sign up on the membership form later as well. Okay, so back to the guide. We have split the guide into 7 sections. Everyone has a guide? Anyone don't have? Okay, if you don't have, it's okay, not a problem. You just pick it up later. So the guide has 7 sections. If you flip to the contents page, which is on page 4, you might notice a typo in the second line, but please ignore it. We'll fix it. But you will see also, the 7 key sections that we have covering a range of aspects of the death penalty. So overall, also with an emphasis on the death penalty for drugs. So you can take your time to look through it later. First thing I want to talk about is the vision behind the guide. So earlier, Koki talked about the importance of having access to information, right? When we tackle the first question about democracy, and there's no way we can say that this is a view that we have, or we stand for, or against the death penalty when we ourselves don't even have the access to the information to form these thoughts or build our consciousness in the first place. So with so much of the dominant narrative, just permeating our classrooms and media and all that, it's important that we also have a tool to counter this harmful narrative and be able to build consciousness amongst ourselves and with one another also. So this guide serves as one of hopefully many more mediums of cultural production that we have to be able to build a narrative together that preaches safety and builds good and loving communities in our society through building this consciousness about what actually is the death penalty, where do the harms actually lie, how do we confront our own assumptions about the death penalty that we might have come to internalize through what we watch in the media or what we hear in school as well. Yeah, so having access to knowledge and information is key to democracy at large. So this is the vision behind the guide as well. When you have this guide, of course it's not some holy sacred text, you can just use it as a guide. And it's also not like a textbook, you don't have to study it, we won't quiz you, don't worry. So just take your time to look through it, and you might find it helpful both for yourself and also in talking to your peers about it. So how you can use the guide? I think it's quite straightforward. I don't know why I was asked this question. Yeah, just read it. If you want to read it as a bedtime story, you can do that as well. It's quite it's not very lengthy also. It's a very thin book. So I think what is helpful for me as a student is that I would read it, in parts. So you don't have to internalize all the information in one sitting. Of course, if you want, you can. But I find it more helpful to read it maybe I read chapter 1 today and then chapter 2 tomorrow. And of course, put it into practice also. You can keep this knowledge in your head, but it's not going to do much if you don't have conversations with people as well and bring this knowledge to your peers and circles as well. So that actually segues into how you yourself can contribute towards our petition collection also. So we have a physical petition sheet there, so we can help with it for people. Yeah, so we have a physical petition sheet over there. So that's actually what we started with when we started collecting signatures for a petition calling for moratorium of the death penalty. And physical signatures wise, I think we have 1.7k or more, 1.7k so far. More than 1.7k. Okay, and our goal is 100k. So we need to multiply that by a lot, and we can't do that ourselves. Yeah, so that's why we need your help. So using the guide can be helpful in framing your conversations, and it's okay if you encounter a question that you don't know how to answer on the spot. This is it's a process and a journey that we go through together to refine our own principles and our understanding of the death penalty as well. So okay, so everyone has the brochure, the action pack brochure. Okay, I need you all to look at tips on starting the conversation with me. And if you have a pen, you can write notes as well as I bring you all through this. Okay, can Okay, everyone knows how to have a conversation with someone you just met. So you introduce yourself, and your intention. Okay. This is a presentation about conversation, but you can have conversation later. You listen to me first. Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, that's for introduction. Then for issue and agitation, right? Okay, I think introduction I don't have to talk so much. A framing that we use, or rather a conversation starter that we use often when we go door knocking with to talk to residents is that we introduce ourselves like, hey, hi, my name is Elijah. I just want to have a better understanding of how people feel about the death penalty and just want to engage in conversation. There are some people also who upfront also share I'm from Transformative Justice Collective. I'm collecting signatures for a petition. So there are different ways that people introduce themselves. You can just figure out what works for you or what feels most comfortable when you engage in a conversation. And point two over there, you will see issue and agitation. So while we're having a conversation, right, there's this, okay, I'm just throwing out an arbitrary percentage, 80-20, but the idea is that you have more, you listen more than you speak when you're having these conversations. Because you also want to understand what values or what principles the person you're talking to is coming from, so that you can respond to that later also as the conversation goes on. So the questions that you ask is also intended to bring out what the people that you're talking to are concerned about and what they believe in or what are values that they hold close to heart. So some questions that you can ask, perhaps would be, sharing about how, there have been more than 10 executions in the past 2 years. How do you feel about this news? Or have you ever thought about the death penalty in Singapore and how it's implemented? How do you feel about the use of the death penalty? And what values are guiding you to believe in or not believe in the death penalty? Do you feel like the death penalty addresses your concerns about drugs? What are your beliefs about the value of human life? And who do you think has a right to take life and cause harm to others? So these are, different types of questions that you can ask to build, paint a picture of the issue that's happening, and also to agitate people into thinking about, actually deep down, do I really believe in the death penalty? Is it in line with my values? Is it in line with principles about what I think about the value of human life, or about what democracy looks like, or what the justice system should be doing for the people, and how it is actually, in fact, acting against the people? Yeah. So if they say that they think that the death penalty is important because it keeps us safe, or that there will be more crime and drugs if we didn't have the death penalty. There are various things that you can talk about. I wouldn't even talk about it if you pay attention to Koki, which I hope you have. But I'll cover some key points. So Koki earlier talked about how there is no clear evidence that the death penalty actually works. If you want to have a more in-depth understanding about that, I think Dr. my Sato talked about that during the webinar we had 2 evenings ago, which is on our Facebook, so you can give that a listen as well. And also, there's actually a study that compares homicide rates in Singapore, where we have the death penalty, and Hong Kong, where there is no death penalty. And this study found no evidence that the death penalty actually works to deter murder. Yeah, so the argument of deterrence is very ungrounded and imaginary in a bad way. Yeah, not a good imagination. Okay, so yeah, so there's actually no evidence that proves that death penalty deters drug offences. And yeah, just read the guidebook for like more pointers on how you can respond to concerns or myths like this also. Okay, and if you look at point number 3, it says vision and education. So it's helpful, as part of a conversation to also paint a vision for them on what their actions can contribute to. So it's not just like when you engage in a conversation, right? It's not like you're debating the person and like you want to win that like, okay, I'm going to change your mind by the end of this conversation and you are going to sign my petition and I'm going to fight you on this. Like that's not the approach, you wanna be able to understand and also like paint a picture of how you can instill hope in someone that like when we share these beliefs about about life, about like principles, about the justice system and all that. Like what can we do together that actually makes our community safer, that makes life a reality for everyone. So you can imagine a community where we can focus on reducing harm and safeguarding care instead. When we look at preventing and responding to drug issues, where human life would be valued and honored. So if there's a way to address the root cause of drug issues without taking human life, you can paint a picture that we should strive to do whatever we can to create this reality where the death penalty is not seen as necessary in order to keep one another safe. And the reality is that many countries have done so. So it's not something that is out of it's something that's real that we can remove the death penalty and society can still be functioning. In fact, like society will function better without the death penalty. And we can make our voices heard when we call for the end of state-sanctioned murder together. And that's where you can bring out the petition and ask if you want to sign. So oftentimes like for myself, like when I have these conversations with people, I tend to just carry a petition with me wherever I go. So it could be like I just started an internship and like we're having lunch together with colleagues, then this conversation will come up. I think it comes up quite organically for me at least. Like tomorrow when you all go back to work or go to school and people ask like, hey, what do you do this weekend? They can be like, oh, I attended this DJC event. They can start talking about the death penalty. Like the entry is quite like simple and like and then we can segue into these conversations about what they think about the death penalty and also how we can collectively imagine a safer society together. Okay, the 4th point over there, you'll see discovering assets. So what that means is that now that you've signed a petition, then what next? How else do you contribute to the movement? So you can ask questions like, do you have friends you could talk to about this? Have you had conversations about this before? And also like, just to build on like what experiences they've had and the networks that they have to bring this conversation forward to find like our shared understandings about the death penalty and whatnot. Yeah, and also it's helpful also like to have the space to reflect on how previous conversations have gone and how we can refine our strategies or talk about the strategies that we took together and learn from one another also, so that we can have more fruitful conversations with people about the death penalty. Okay, the final step number 5, inviting commitment. So at this point, the petition sheet should be on the dinner table already. And so you share the petition with them. You could read it out or ask them to read it. The petition is like 2 pages long, so I think most people don't want to read it. You can just read an abridged version for them, or if they want, they can read it in full. So then after they read it, check in on whether they understand what they just read or what you just shared. And what their immediate reactions are to it and what they feel about the petition itself. So then, yeah, I mean, of course, like, if they have any like concerns or questions, then that's why you are there to address it for them. And also, yeah, invite commitment, whether to ask, like, after this conversation we've had, will you be willing to sign the petition? Are there any concerns you have that I can help address, or like we could further discuss together? So really, like having that conversation as a space to be able to bridge understanding with one another, rather than entering it with the vision that it's going to be a debate. We don't debate one another. We just debate Minister Shanker. So unfortunately, he only wants to debate billionaires now, but one day we will get there. Okay, so if they say no, yeah, just ask them, address their concerns, and also it will be helpful to bridge the conversation back to what they have said before, right? Like perhaps like they might have said that like, or they believe that so like first CCA, secondary school, second CCA, math class, English class, like all that stuff. So you can think about these different like categories of like social networks that you have, and you list out the names and like just slowly talk to people. So that's what I did also when I started thinking about who I can have conversations with about the death penalty. So I listed out like, okay, these are all the friends that I know in JC, these are all the friends who I know when I was in JC, but they are not JC friends. I just somehow know them. Yeah, then I just like started having conversations with them, like whenever we met up, or just had this conversation with them over text, over call, like whatever is convenient with your friends. Okay, so how to start these conversations in the first place? I know it can be quite intimidating to just like have lunch with your colleagues and like, I got petition for you to sign, So I think what can be helpful is that a number of us, we have TJC stickers on our laptop. So that actually like is a conversation starter for people. Like they see like, oh, actually I have one of the stickers with me. Okay, so if you had signed the petition for moratorium, you will have received this sticker, or you can collect it. Okay, you can't see from wherever you are, but it says, I signed the petition for moratorium on the death penalty. You can sign it to it, then the link. So you can collect the sticker, you can put it at somewhere where people that you interact with in a day-to-day life can see, and that is a basis on which like people can ask questions or engage in conversation with. And it works, like from my experience, my previous phone case, I had a Palestine sticker there. And like someone actually like started a conversation with me because they saw it, and it was a total stranger. So I think like there are avenues whereby like having something publicly displayed will invite a conversation, then you will feel less awkward or like less confrontational if you are the one to initiate it. Yeah, so talk to everyone in your life, talk to your grandmother, talk to your neighbors. Like you all take the same lift every day, just like have a brief conversation about it, So so these are various ways in which you can integrate conversations about the death penalty into your day-to-day life. And you can also think about your strengths when thinking about how you want to communicate like conversations about the death penalty. So some people they are good at art, they might design like a poster that they put up on their Instagram, or I don't know what other things creative people do. I'm sorry, but like write a post on Facebook if you have like 10,000 followers or something. So like there are different assets and strengths that people have. Just make use of it and get the conversation going. And also, so those are the things that you can do as an individual to be a part of this collective movement. We also recently launched the Advocates Alliance Against the Death Penalty. So Sobi will talk more about that later. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think I talked finished. Sobi, your turn. Okay, thanks. If you have questions for me, ask.
The power and authority being taken away from us. That being said, it's also important to remember that most of the individuals on death row are merely couriers of drugs, not even the heinous harm that I think majority of Singaporeans think death penalty is being used for. I remember that when I was first invited to TJC back in 2020, I said no because I was like, I don't really believe in myself. I thought I was useless maybe in this movement, and I also thought I had no capacity. But then like in 2021, I suddenly had capacity.
changed, right? But I guess somehow capacity grew inside of me. When I saw like the hard work of like Kirsten, and the others from TGC in the efforts to campaign for the safe execution for Nagaenthran, who was unjustly executed in 2022. And I saw that there had been groups of people that had been putting together petitions. I'm not sure which groups back then, like I think maybe it was artists, doctors, and stuff. Then I thought like, okay, I'm a social worker, I'm a social service professional, and let me like put together one petition for all social service professionals. So there was around like 600 to 700 signees. And then after that, it was like, I used to call it a gateway drug. Like I found myself attending the Hong Park visuals and protests against the death penalty. I was suddenly like supporting Kawan's family in the days, leading to his execution, and that was like deeply impactful for me. I started like organizing people to collect signatures for the Salter King petition, and then like sending it to the MDS, carrying out the working session, blah blah blah. Like I could go on and on, right? And then along the way, I think I officially joined TGC, like maybe like last year, yeah. So okay, I'll wrap up soon. But one thing I wanted to highlight also is that it was very important for me as a younger activist to actually understand the history of the death penalty movement in Singapore and activism in general. Because I think if I just left school without really looking at the facts, I would just think that like people who have been doing activism are just like random troublemakers or like misfits in society. But actually, the movement against the death penalty, the movement to challenge the state has been going on for like around 50 years already. I mean, back then, like there were people protesting about national service. There were people like doing protests about other countries going through like genocide and violence. And we also had similar actions for the death penalty. And death row inmates, family members have been like so important in the movement. They have tried for years appealing outside the Istana, letter delivery actions, organizing visuals together with civil society activists, which also led to investigations and restrictions being put onto them. And I mean, we look at the same thing happening now. Like we also have taken lead from all of that. And we also face persecution for that, right? For whether it's for death penalty or for Palestine or other issues, right? And like like you said just now. We follow in the footsteps of like David Marshall, the first Chief Minister of Singapore, and even back then already he said like the death penalty is a complete failure because the death row is full and overflowing, therefore it's like a failure. And then now the same is true also, right? I mean, if we look at if any of you watched the film Condemned, Don was talking about how the death row is actually full and overflowing. He said that in like 1994. So you can do the math like 2024 minus 1994. Yeah, and then we also have J.P. Jeyaretnam, who was a leading opposition politician, and what was very interesting for me was that he actually used to be a deputy public prosecutor for murder trials. And he talked about how every time a death sentence passed, his knees trembled because he knew that he was sending someone to their death. And he also raised a point that still stands today, which is how he was very concerned about the legal presumptions, which puts the burden of proof onto the accused to prove that they had no knowledge of drugs. He raised that back in like 2000. It's 24 years now. And we're still saying the same points, right? In contrast, the state also in 1970s when they first introduced like the capital punishment for drugs, the rhetoric that was being shared is that drug traffickers are merchants of death. They lead unrealistic lives. I mean, I don't know like what does that even mean, to be honest. What's an unrealistic life? I'm not quite sure. But then like this was the kind of rhetoric that was being shared. Like it's very dramatic, like rooted in like hysteria. And I mean, we still hear the same things now, like the claiming of drug traffickers as like the ultimate like abominable human beings who ever exist in the world. So all this is to say that I think it was important for me to look at the past, to take reference, as we see from the actions that we do nowadays, and also to take stock, like other countries have moved in the 50 years towards like more like humane ways of taking care of people and treating other people right. But Singapore is still doing the same thing, and in fact, like they're increasingly making it harder to save people's lives. Like each year, I was looking at each year, maybe every 2 to 3 years, they introduce something to make it easy for them to kill someone. Like we used to have a jury system, then after that we went to like having 2 judges to choose, and now we just have 1 judge to choose whether a person like dies or not. Yeah. So yeah, I think I will end over there. And then now I would just like to ask Xiong, Kirsten, and Aislinn, maybe you could just share a bit more about your journey in the movement, like where did you get involved, what would you get involved in? Could you share some significant moments for yourself?
Hi, so I'm Xiong. So, my journey started 17 plus years ago with the case of Tochi. So, Tochi was an 18-year-old Nigerian footballer caught with dimorphine, basically heroin capsules during his transit in Changi Airport. So, he was on route to Dubai to pursue his football career. At the time, the boy apparently believed that those pills would be some African herbs. And he was kind of just delivering them to a sick person staying in Singapore. And he was doing this for a favor of a friend who seemed to have helped him deal with travel issues. I think travel visa issues in Pakistan. So, well, he was hung 3 years later on Friday morning, 27 January 2007. He was only 21, 4 years after that. So, and there was a virgin held outside Changi Prison the night before. I went straight to it after work, stayed up until 6 a.m. with rest. At 6 a.m. is when they executed him. And after that, basically my workplace at the time was at Changi, and I stayed in England, so it was just too far to go back to rest. So I decided to just find a HDB block nearby and slept near the office, and then I went straight for it. The thing I remember of that morning was it was really, really cold. So anyway, the series of so for me it was still not my first involvement in active involvement in data therapy advocacy. It was actually much later. So a series of important political events later that year, which is around 2007, both domestic and international, like the proposal for the ASEAN Human Rights Charter and the suffrage revolution in Myanmar, basically where there's this uprising where the Burmese monks started voting against the Burmese junta at the time. So in response, we did a week-long project, basically came outside the Burmese embassy for a week. So it was through this activity that brought me close to a couple of like-minded and very progressive folks. So, and for myself, I actually kind of came out of that with an existential crisis. So, so you say you were a social, you work in social services. I'm basically further staying away from that. So I work in IT. So at the time, I was working as a game developer, and like at some point, I just decided I just couldn't continue working. So and I kind of just left my job and went down the path of political activism. So we did all kinds of things actually. So this included civil disobedience. So we basically had a lot of run-ins with police and courts. For us, we kind of understood the section of many contemporary issues, and basically tried to do it given a space we had. So fast forward to late 2009, Xiong Kong's case kind of just fell into that. So we were basically just having a regular gathering with my friends, and so on. And a place we like to call, at a kopitiam, we like to call Rebels Cafe because that's just where we often hang out. So MRV, which is Singapore Data Therapy Campaign, is founder. And a good friend of ours brought up Kong's case to us and his plans for the campaign. So we decided to co-organize it again, and we kicked the gear, got involved in organizing a forum to kickstart the campaign on the World Death Penalty Day that year. And we follow up with public appeals, protests, solidarity actions. So in 2009, by then, only part had already been open. So we made good use of that. Behind the scenes, we also tried to support the Kong's family however we could. So little did we expect that campaign really blew up nationally, maybe even internationally. And that culminated in the moratorium for executions. And finally, amendments to the mandatory death penalty. Recall and many inmates had their death sentences commuted after the new guidelines. So yeah, so that was my main that was kind of how I came to.
Thank you, guys. Kirsten, would you like to go next?
So I also started with the Xiong case about a year after Xiong, so it was already underway by the time I joined. Since I moved back, since I was studying abroad and I moved back to Singapore at the beginning of 2010, and it just kind of happened that I just fell into it like completely by accident because the starting point was the Online Citizen, which at the time was a very volunteer-run citizen journalism outfit. They were running a campaign against the mandatory death penalty, so they wanted to abolish the mandatory aspect of the death penalty, and it was a campaign they were running concurrent to the Safe Recall campaign, right? So because the constitutional challenge that M. Ravi was bringing was challenging the constitutionality of the mandatory death penalty. So TOC was running the mandatory death penalty. Now that I think about it, in today's Singapore, it would be so important, of course. We were running a whole abolish MVP campaign as Ravi was challenging the MVP in court. And I just fell into it because one of the things that TOC was doing box interviews at lunch hour, going up to people at Raffles Place, going up to people at NUS Law School, going to Toa Payoh, Heartland, and just asking people, right, what are your views on this? And a lot of times they're just I've never heard of it before, right? And then capturing that as well, the fact that people have never heard of it before was also worth it. And so I just fell into it because my friend said, can you come and hold the camera? And that was actually what I was signing up for 14 years ago. So I went and held the camera, and I kind of thought that okay, it would be very embarrassing if we were asking all these people about the mandatory death penalty, but I hadn't read about it myself. So I would read it before I go and hold the camera, and that was really the first time. Actually, that was the first time in my life that I read legislation. It's never occurred to me before, right? That you could actually Google the laws and read the laws and stuff. But that's the first time I read it, and I was like, wait, what do you mean there are presumption clauses? What do you mean that it's mandatory? What do you mean that the judges don't get to decide? And that was a really rude awakening. That the death penalty is not really what I thought it was. I just always assumed that because it's such a harsh punishment, and because Singapore, as we are told in school, is such a rule of law country, that only the worst of the worst end up on death row, right? I was so convinced that only the most guilty of guilty people, they must have so many tests, they must, really check, and they must be really sure before they sentence someone to death. So therefore, people on death row must be really evil people. And then to read the legislation and be like, no wait, hang on, it's way easier to end up on death row than I thought it was going to be. That was really uncomfortable for me. So that was the sort of starting point. But I think what was really striking was being sent to cover the hearing. So that was a hearing where Ravi was challenging the constitutionality of the mandatory death penalty. And I was asked, again for TOC, but also for my job, because I was working for a documentary film company that was making a film about Xiong. And so for my job and also for TOC, I had to attend the hearing. Again, the very first time I've ever gone to a court hearing. And what I think was really striking was that they brought Wikong in, and he was sitting in the dock. And so you have the AGC, then you had Ravi, and then there was the interpreter, and there was Wikong, and then there was the judges, and then us on the public gallery side. And I was just very struck by how it was just so surreal to me because it was a constitutional challenge. It was not actually debating Wikong's case. They were debating points of Commonwealth law, case law,